Hi. Well, I hope you're having a great day today. We are wrapping up Vacation Bible School here at church this week, and it's been a wonderful week. The weather has cooperated, the kids are having a great time, and so many wonderful volunteers. Um, and that brings me kind of today to Jeremiah again and the chapters we're reading for today, because I was thinking about all that's gone on this week, the dedication of people, the joy in wearing their shirts and having a heart for God in their singing and in their activities, and got to thinking that's really what God wants for us each and every day, all day in our lives. But our lesson today basically points out what happens when people decide they want to go their own way. And that's been the problem all along. And in this case, because they're not listening to what Jeremiah is saying, today Jeremiah is going to actually become a living sermon. And so in chapters 16 and 17, God gives him some commands. Number one, he's not to marry, he's not to mourn, and he's not to mingle with other people and celebrate together, hoping that this will get their attention. Because the reality is this is not what God has ordained for his people. Those were all things God wanted for them. But the people have pushed God out of the way in their lives, or certainly into a small corner of it, so that they could do whatever it is they want. So Jeremiah, therefore, is bringing this lesson to bear in front of them. Now, the same is true in our lesson today when we hear the discussion concerning the Sabbath. And of course, it sounds very familiar to Jesus turning over the tables of the money changers when he entered the temple on that Jerusalem visit before his crucifixion. God made the people to be productive for 6 days. Our job was to use the gifts he gives us to be productive and to work 6 days a week. But the idea was that on the seventh day, on the Sabbath day, we would rest. And we would rest in him so that we might be renewed and refreshed and recreated. Well, the people in their greed have decided that commerce must rule the day even on the Sabbath day, and therefore what ultimately happens is they might gain a few dollars, but they're gaining nothing spiritually. There is no renewal, there is no refreshment, and there is no recreation. I know my wife Pam has lamented in the past the times that she has seen and been very disappointed on holidays and on Sundays to see that in many cases in our culture it becomes just another day to make money. In fact, some of the biggest holidays ultimately become some of the biggest sale days and weekends of the year. And we both comment on how when we grew up, on holidays, no stores were open. You didn't go shopping. In fact, I can remember times where on Sundays, very few stores were open. That was a day to worship God and then to spend with families. And we have really lost something nowadays, I think, in that regard. We have blended in and allowed the culture to dictate what we're about. The other piece in today's lesson that I want to bring to your attention is this account in Jeremiah 35 regarding the Rechabites. The Rechabites were a sect who lived in the uplands of Judah, and they were actually founded about 300 years earlier by a man named Jonadab, who was the son of Rechab. And what they did at that time was to violently throw out all Baal worship and go back to what they believed was the correct way to live and to follow God. So they were almost fanatical in their worship of Yahweh. We might think of it in terms of the Nazaritic vows, where you didn't drink wine or shave your head at all. And I would make a note about the theology here. Even though they are being lifted up here, unlike the prophets, God is not saying their theology is perfect. See, the Rechabites were all about returning to the desert. What they felt like that was going on was there was nothing redeeming in the culture. The culture has nothing to offer. Let's all go back to the desert and get away from it. The prophets, on the other hand, felt like the culture is redeemable. God's desire is that we would turn back to him. So in their minds, it wasn't return to the desert. It was return to the Lord. That is where we need to go. So there's a little difference here. However, what God was lifting up through Jeremiah here was not their theology, but rather their faithfulness to what they believed. God's desire is that his people would have a heart for him, that what's in their heart, we know, always affects actions. And the prophets showed where their hearts were at as they crowded God out of their lives, or at least into a small portion of it, so that they could do what they wanted to do. Their actions showed where their hearts were at. Their hearts were not turned towards the Lord. The Rechabites ultimately came to Jerusalem for protection as Babylon began to close in around Jerusalem. Interestingly, they were brought into the temple meeting area in front of all the who's who of the town, and they were challenged. They were offered wine and those kinds of things. They could have easily have said, well, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. But they didn't. They showed where their hearts were at, and this was very important to God in front of all the people to see that here's a people who act according to what they say they believe. That's what God wants for us. And in God's eyes, certainly what Jeremiah was saying was how refreshing it is to see a people who live out what they truly believe. And that really brings, for me, the question of the day as I think about it. Do I blend in the culture that I live in, or do I stand up faithful to God's call and will for my life? You see, God is not asking for perfection out of me. Jesus provides that already. Jesus died for my sins in payment for my sins, and Jesus, when God looks at me, he sees his Son, his perfect Son. But what God is desiring of me is that my heart would be turned toward him and would guide my actions. I open my life to God. I open my heart to God that he might recreate and work in me a work of being shaped by him. And that takes more than just an hour on Sunday morning or on Saturday night. It takes each and every day turning to the Lord and opening myself up and allowing him to work, so that I might then seek to influence the culture rather than let the culture influence me. And that becomes my challenge for today, because clearly what we're seeing in the people of Judah is that they have totally gone over to what the world says is the way to live, and have turned away from Yahweh at this point. May that never happen to me. May that never be the case for you as well. God's blessings on your day. We'll look forward to talking with you again.